continue to pray about what we should do here as a mission work, the different ways that we can try to reach people, as well as just the different things we need to think about in regards to the mission work. So just be praying about those things. All right. Well, this afternoon we are going to be in the book of Psalms chapter 56. Psalms chapter 56. There is a superscription above this one. There's some indication. It does talk a little bit about what it was written about. Now, there's really probably a couple different times that this could be, or could even be a time we're not aware of. But there's another psalm that we already covered. I think it was Psalms 34. We'll just take a quick look back there at Psalms 34. Remember, this one talks about a time when David changed his behavior and got driven away. This is basically a time, Psalms 34 is dealing with a time where we know that right after David had been to the priest and had gotten the bread and had gotten the other things, and then, of course, there's the indication there that Saul had the priest killed and some other things along those lines. David went over into Gath, and he was, I don't know, it's almost like one of those things, you get the idea that he fled. He went over there to Gath, right? That's the land of the Philistines. That's the land of the enemy. That's the last place you'd want to go if you're David, by the way, right? You don't have maybe too many friends in Gath, you would think, right? But he's chased by Saul, and he doesn't have much choice, it seems. But as he gets there, he starts to hear some things that make him think, well, this was a really bad idea. And he actually has to act like a crazy man in order to get out. There's some indication that this is Psalms, although Psalms 34 specifically talks about that time. There's an indication that Psalms 56 could also be dealing with that time. We also know that there's a time when David did go over into that area of the Philistines, and this time he stayed for a little while and seemed to have been, quote-unquote, friendly with them, although it seems like there was this one king that was okay with David. But we know that when the Philistines went to have battle with Saul, that this one king was willing for David and his men to come with him, but the other kings said, yeah, he's an Israelite. What are you doing? Like, he can't come with us to fight the Israelites. So you understand that even though David seemed to have had a little bit of connection there with the king, it was a tenuous situation. It was one where David actually had to, Brother Philip went through this not too long ago, David actually had to hide the actions he was doing so that the Philistines wouldn't actually know what he was doing. So you understand, even when David was living over there under the protection of the Philistines, he knew he was still with enemies, right? Matter of fact, I don't know if you guys know this, because some of what I just said, we struggle sometimes with this. When we think about there being a king, we think about there being one king. If you've studied the Philistines, you understand that the Philistines actually seem to have been divided into 5 different lords. And so when that story about David having been living over there under the protection of the Philistines, now this group of people is coming together and they're going to battle, and the one king wants to take David with them. And we see there that the rest of them say, no, he can't come. That doesn't make any sense to us, because we often think about a kingdom ruled by one king. And that king, what that king says goes. But the Philistines, like I said, seem to have been kind of this collection of like 5 different lords or 5 different kind of ruling families. And so you imagine that you go to battle, and you got 5, you got one of them that's on your side, well, the other 4 don't trust you. And that's basically, even when David was living there under their protection, that's the situation he was faced with. He really was still viewed as an enemy. He really was still in enemy territory. And he kept doing what he needed to do, honestly, for the nation of Israel, for the people that are following him, and kind of to undermine some of the other people that were in that land. And he had to keep all of that on the down low, right? Because he knew that if it came out, man, they'd be after him. So you imagine living in those conditions. I give all of that stuff to give a little bit of background to understand whichever time this is talking about. David was not in a secure position any of those times, right? He lived in a time, or this is dealing with a time in his life, where stability was not exactly something that he had, right? Not from a physical perspective. You might understand that he trusted the Lord and he had promises from the Lord and he knew what was going to come. We understand those things. But listen, from a physical perspective, looking at the condition David was in, it was not a secure position. Now, I can stand up here and say this, but I really want you guys trying to put yourself in that situation as you read Psalms chapter 56. Okay? I look out at this room, and I get it. We all have trials and troubles, but for the most part, I'm looking at each of you thinking, you really have a pretty stable life. I mean, you think about the people in Ukraine right now, the people over in the Middle East right now. There are people that every day their life is in danger, right? We don't necessarily understand that. I mean, we grasp the concept, but we don't live it, and we've never had to live it. And so from that perspective, we struggle to really understand that. But I want you to imagine for a little bit, if you would, that instead of being in your parents' house right now, right? I'm looking at the younger ones in your parents' house, or those of you that may be having your own families, your own place, right? And if you're old enough, you've got a job, which means you've got money coming in. You've got vehicles, even if you maybe have trouble with them every once in a while, or somebody hits them and you can't get a replacement and all this stuff, right? But overall, things are pretty good. Well, now I want you to take all that away, right? You're not able to be living where you want to live. You have to stay far away from your family. Let's say that your parents are off limits. You can't go there. Your spouse is off limits. You can't go back there. When you had to leave with nothing, which meant you didn't have weapons, you didn't have food, and now you've collected a group of people that look to you for leadership, and they're following you, and you left with not even enough stuff to care for yourself. And so not only is somebody chasing you down, trying to hunt you down and kill you, but because of that, you've had to leave everything that you love and everything that you know and any stability that you had, and now you're living on the run. And you don't know who's going to betray you and who isn't, because, by the way, you've already had multiple people try to turn you in. You can't go home. You can't go back to your job. And you are having to scrape and forage and whatever you can do to have the things that you need. And it's gotten so bad that you actually think, well, I'm not only going to leave where I'm from, but I'm actually going to go hang out with the people that hate our country. Okay? I'm not going to put any names to this, but I want you to imagine, as an American, there are some places in this world that you would probably consider our enemy. You know they don't like us very much. Maybe there's even been some fights and some battles between us over time. Okay, so take everything that I just said and now understand that you actually have to go live with them. The people that don't like the country you came from. The people that are trying to figure out how they can undermine your country. The people that if they would have the opportunity would attack and take over your country. Now you got to go live with them. And the first time you show up there, they know who you are. Oh, and by the way, they know your reputation. And suddenly they say, hey, this is David. Let's go take him to the king and see what the king wants to do with him. And now you're afraid that your life may be over anyways. You fled here hoping to get away from somebody trying to kill you, only to step into a situation where you're not sure whether you're going to live out the day or not. That is the basic concept of what David was faced with. And I know we know the story, and I know we read it, and at a high level we grasp the concept, but we really don't. So think about if it was you, and you look around this room, and you think about these people that love you, and that care about you, and are here to help you, and that this is a safe place you can come. But now imagine that if you pulled into this parking lot and you walked through that door, you would be arrested, at best arrested, at worst taken out into the parking lot and killed. That begins to get to where David was when he wrote some of these Psalms. And so as you read these words, understand the guy that wrote these was going through some of those things I just described. This is no casual statement. When the psalmist says, "In God will I trust," we're not talking about some pretty little saying that gets put on a poster to make you feel better. This is from a guy whose life is in danger every single day. If you remember here recently when we were going through some of these Psalms and when Brother Philip was going through the life of Saul and David, there was one place where it literally said that Saul sought him daily. Not a single day goes by where David knows the Philistines could turn on him at a second or Saul could find him. Those are the conditions that he lives in. And so when he says, "In God will I trust," you have to know that it's just not some casual thing he's throwing out there. This has to be somebody that believes it. He means it. So, with that context, read Psalms chapter 56, verse 1. "Be merciful unto me, O God, for a man would swallow me up. He fighting daily oppresseth me. Mine enemies would daily swallow me up, for they be many that fight against me, O thou most high." You think about this. He opens the psalm with a prayer that the Lord would be merciful to him, that the Lord would show kindness and mercy to him. I love David's humbleness. Hey, listen, did David do anything really to deserve Saul's wrath? He didn't. But I think you also see in David an understanding of he knows his own self. He knows his condition before God. And when he goes to the Lord with a petition, the words that he uses are "show mercy." Lord, be merciful to me. Hear me and be merciful to me. And then as he does this, I've told you before, David lays his problems out before the Lord. It's a good example. When you have problems, man, you need to ask the Lord for mercy. You need to ask the Lord for help. And you don't have to just be generic with it. Listen, when it's between you and God, I don't expect you to stand up here in the middle of this congregation and out loud say some of the things that you are on your heart. Now, sometimes that's okay. But I get it. Sometimes you may not want to say those things in public. But between you and God, you don't have to hold back anything. You know, the psalmist could have said, Lord, be merciful to me. I got some problems. Or, Lord, be merciful to me. I got some unspoken prayer requests. You know what he said? He said, Lord, daily people are looking to overcome me. Daily people are looking to destroy me. He just laid it all out right in front of the Lord. Here's the problem I have, Lord. I know you know this already. Lord, be merciful to me because daily people are oppressing me. And people are fighting against me. And he ends this statement with the words, O thou most high. Be merciful to me. Here's my problem. And then a recognition of just who God is. God, I know you are the most high. How can those statements, one, they do bring glory to God. I think even uttering them should bring comfort to the one that's praying the words, because he recognizes that man is out to get him, but who is he praying to? He is praying to the Most High, the one who's higher than all, the one who has more power, more ability, everything. You cannot get higher than God. That's who he is bringing his prayers and petitions to. And because of that, because he knows who his promises are from, and because he knows who he is taking his prayers and petitions before, he can utter these next words. What time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. Man, it's a short statement, but it's so powerful. What time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. Time and time again, David had seen the Lord fulfill his promises and protect David. David had a promise from God, you will be king. And time again, it looked like that wasn't going to happen because the enemies were going to overthrow David. And time again, God protected David. David recognizes who he's praying to. David recognizes God's ability. And David is able to say, when I'm afraid, I'm going to trust in you. Now listen, we should trust in the Lord all the time. But do you know what some really good encouragement is when those fears start to assail you? You pray to God, you give him your challenge, and then you step back and you trust him. Because that's what David's saying here. He's asked for mercy. He's outlined his problem. He's declared, I know who you are, God. You're the Most High. And now David is stepping back saying, when I'm afraid, I'm going to trust you. You know, oftentimes it's those times when we're afraid where we really don't know what to do. When we're afraid, we don't know which direction to go. We don't know what's going to happen. We're not sure what's going to come up next. And oftentimes it feeds on itself because the very emotion and the things that come along with fear, they can almost draw us down to like immobility or indecision, right? That's kind of our natural reaction to fear. And so it compounds itself. And the psalmist says, when I hit that point, I know what I have to do. I got to trust you. I got to trust you. It says in verse 4, in God I will praise his word. So not only did he say, when I'm afraid, I will trust in you, but he said, in God, in the strength and power of God, I will praise His word. When you're afraid, trust God, pray to God, praise God. David has done those three things, and we're only 4 verses in. He prayed to God, he trusted God, and he's praising God. In God, I have put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do unto me. It's interesting, isn't it, that he recognizes, hey, I get afraid. I get afraid. Matter of fact, if you remember back to the story, the first time he went over into Gath, and he recognized, hey, they know who I am. Oh, they're taking me to the king. You know what? These people may want to kill me. It describes that he got afraid. And he actually started to act like a crazy person so they would let him go. There's other places where David ends up deciding that he's going to have to leave the country again because he is afraid of Saul. So when David utters these words, don't take it to mean that, hey, this is a guy that was so brave, he was never afraid of anything. You read the Psalms and you understand David got afraid. But what David did when he would get afraid, he'd pray, he'd praise, and he would take it to the Lord, and he would trust that God was going to provide. And after he says those things, he utters this, I will not fear what flesh can do unto me. This is a guy, by the way, who Saul is seeking his life daily, and he is with and surrounded by the enemies of his nation. And yet he says, I'm not going to fear what man can do to me because God is on my side. That's really what he's saying. I'm trusting God. God knows what he's doing. God's in control. God's promises will be fulfilled. They cannot be overcome. I'm going to trust in him instead of living my life afraid. I will not fear what flesh can do to me. Verse 5, every day they wrest my words, and all their thoughts are against me are for evil. Whoever he was looking at here and whatever was going on, he said, every day I literally have to watch out everything I say because they are there ready to twist and to turn and to make accusations against me. And I know that their thoughts, no matter what's showing on their face, that their thoughts are evil against me. And man, they are out to undermine me. He said that, by the way, after he said, I will not fear what flesh can do to me. I want you to recognize something. When he calls out, I will not be afraid of what flesh can do to me, he is drawing a comparison or a contrast to what it is that he does lean on. What's that? God. He says, hey, look, flesh, mankind, I'm not afraid of them because I'm trusting in God. And unlike flesh, man, God's will cannot be overcome, cannot be beaten. And then in verse 6, he says, they gather themselves together, they hide themselves, they mark my steps when they wait for my soul. You remember when there was the Ziphites we talked about recently, when they went and got Saul and said, hey, we know where he is. And Saul said, well, go back, and you hunt him out, and you spy on him, and then you bring me a full report of where he's at and what he's doing. You see here, David knew that there were times when people were literally marking his steps. They were following his movements, waiting for their opportunity to be able to pounce. Verse 7, shall they escape by iniquity? In thine anger cast down the people, O God. It's interesting, David here, listen, he's prayed for mercy, he's praised God, he's admitted he was afraid, he's laid those cares before the Lord, and he said, I'm trusting in God, and because I'm trusting in God, I'm not going to fear what man can do to me. This is what man is trying to do to me. But Lord, you are the righteous judge, and I now bring them before you and ask that you judge them accordingly. Now that's a little foreign to us sometimes, right? We always think about, and it's right and it's just. We do. We need to pray for our enemies. We need to be good to them that despitefully use us and persecute us, right? Those are good biblical principles that we need to follow. But listen, we also understand that there is a time when you take your prayers and your petitions before the Lord. And David was not afraid to say, listen, these are the enemies of God, these are the enemies of my people, and these are the enemies of myself. And Lord, I ask that you judge them. In verse 8, he recognizes the personal care that God has for him. Thou tellest my wanderings. Put thou my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in thy book? The psalmist knows as a child of God that God knows where he's going and he has laid out his paths. To some degree, the psalmist here is recognizing that even in the paths of trouble that I'm going through, you know where I'm going and why I'm going there. You may have even laid out some of that path for me. He also recognizes that the Lord cares. Hey, listen, when David is afraid, when David is overburdened, when David is crying in the night, the psalmist says, listen, it's like you take my tears and you put them in a little bottle, and they are precious to you, and you care about me. You care about me. What do you think about that picture? You know what happens to your tears? As you cry, you know what they do? They usually roll down your cheek and they fall off into the ground and they're just gone. But the psalmist is like, I know you love me so much that my wanderings and my trials and my troubles and my crying are written in your book, and you understand them and you know where they come from and you care about me. But you care about me so much as if my tears, they don't even have to fall and just disappear. Like you are literally catching them in a bottle and keeping them because they're precious to you. God cares. In verse 9, when I cry unto thee, then shall my enemies turn back. This I know, for God is for me. David says, man, Saul is seeking my life daily. I'm hanging out here with these Philistines who, if I'm honest, some of them may like me, but most of them probably hate me, and they're just looking for the opportunity. And every day I feel like I'm surrounded by enemies. But I know my God cares about me, and I know I trust Him. And when I cry to Him, He hears me and He turns back my enemies. How can David say that? God had done it time and time again. I'm going to ask you, how many times have you been in need and been afraid and you prayed to the Lord? And you know what? You made it through it. He said, God is for me. I know He is. I'm His child. And God is for me. In verse 10, in God will I praise His word. Now this is a repeat of verse, I think it's verse 4. God will I praise his word. In the Lord will I praise his word. That verse there, in God will I praise, and then in Jehovah will I praise. Man, he is doubling down. I will praise God. Even when my king seeks my life, and I'm having to live with the enemies, that, man, give them the chance, they would burn me. And my life is in danger every day. But I will praise God. In verse 11, in God have I put my trust, and I will not be afraid what man can do unto me. 2 times in this one short chapter, he utters something very similar. In God will I trust, and I will not be afraid of what man or flesh can do unto me. 2 times he's told us that. It's not that David doesn't have problems. It's not that people aren't seeking his life. It's not that all that stuff suddenly magically went away. He's still dealing with all of those things. But he says, I have brought it before God, and I've given it to him, and I trust him, and therefore I'm going to move forward without being afraid. Verse 12, thy vows are upon me, O God. I will render praises unto thee. Whether vows that David has given to God, or there are vows that God has given to David. David was told, you will be king. And he says, I know that you will keep your vows. The Lord said something, he's going to do it. And I will render praise unto thee. Verse 13, for thou hast delivered my soul from death. Wilt not thou deliver my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living? David had been delivered by God, right? I think David probably, at this point, David knows that he has been bought and paid for, that he is a child of God. I think he knows that he is a child of God. But he also physically has seen God deliver him from death. And as he looks forward and he says, the Lord has delivered me and I am his. He's delivered me physically from death. I think he can keep me from falling as I go along this path that he has laid out for me. He knows my wanderings. He knows where I'm going. He knows the paths that he has set me on. And I think, based on what I have seen and what I've experienced, he is able to keep me from falling as he sends me down this path. That's the trust that he had in the Lord. Wasn't an easy path. Wasn't a clear path on where it was going. He didn't know what was coming next. When he left with the Philistines, and I think, again, we can debate what he would have done if he would win into battle. I think the Philistines would have regretted it taking him, personally. But when they wouldn't let him go and they sent him back, do you think he knew what was next in his path, that while he was gone, they would have came and taken all of his family? And that he would have had to have went and tried to find them, and by the way, almost lost his men because they were so upset of having lost everything? You see what I'm saying when I say, listen, the path was not clear for David. David knew the troubles he'd been up to this point, but he didn't know which trouble was coming next around the corner. But he said, I know God can keep me from falling. Me and you, we may have been through some things. We may be going through some things. We don't know what we're going to go through next. but God does. And there are some promises that we've been given, no matter what comes next. Listen, the promises of God will be fulfilled. There's nothing that can change that. Can you, will you trust God even in your fear, even when you're afraid, even when you don't know how it's going to get resolved? Trust Him. Trust Him. How many times in your life has He already resolved something for you? How many examples do you have in the Bible of times where He's delivered people? How many times, and maybe family members and friends, where you've heard these great stories of what God has done for them? Even when you're afraid, trust in the Lord. I think you'll actually find comfort in doing that. The indication in this chapter is the psalmist was actually able to find relief from some of his fears when he took those things to God. And he said, I don't know what's next, but I trust you. And in that he found comfort, and in that he found relief. And he built on the times where he had seen God do it before. And we need to do the same. We need to do that. If you get a chance, I know we went through this pretty quick. If you get a chance, just read back through that occasionally. It's a really good chapter, honestly, to read when you are faced with fears. Remember Psalms 56 when you're faced with fear. Lay it at God's feet. Trust Him. Claim His promises. He can send relief. We're thankful to know that He can and that He does.